here's the problem. The governor came out and said, listen, if you're 65 plus, you really should stay home. And I get that. It makes perfect sense. It's something that we're trying to protect the most vulnerable people in the community, and I understand that. The problem is, from an employment law perspective, if you tell a 65 plus employee who says, I'm ready to work, I'm healthy, fine, that they can't come because they're too old, that's called age discrimination. And it's really difficult for employers right now to try to figure out, all right, what's the government telling me to do? What are the laws I'm supposed to be following? It's really tough. And I think a lot of employers are trying to do their best, but they don't realize if they follow that mandate, they are actually engaging in age discrimination.
Wow. And so my kind of follow-up question there was for like these employers, like who are telling those folks not to come back to work, are they worried about being liable if, if they come back to work and then someone gets sick, but then are they liable if people are staying home because of that age discrimination?
And so it's this sort of catch-22, I think, for employers, because under the safety regulations that are promulgated by the federal government, the OSHA folks, and then in California, Cal-OSHA, the employer has to provide the safest possible work environment. Now, that's not a guarantee that somebody won't get sick or become injured, but you got to do your best, right? So on the one hand, they're thinking, oh my gosh, the governor and other people have said, the CDC, the Department of Public Health, hey, if you're 65 plus, you're more vulnerable. So I better not have those people come to work, because if they get hurt, I'm going to have a problem. There's going to be a liability there. But the other liability is age discrimination. And then the other issue that people aren't thinking about is that the governor signed an executive order a couple of weeks ago saying that anybody who gets sick while they are working for an employer during a certain period of time, it's going to be presumed to be a workers' compensation injury, which means it'll be presumed to be work-related if they're working on site, not working, obviously. So that adds to the fear, where employers are thinking, I better just tell these folks who are vulnerable to stay home. But the potential liability for an age discrimination case is significant. And when you read what's going on now for plaintiffs' bar in terms of what cases they're at actually filing, top of the list.
Wow, that's really fascinating that it's these two different sides completely. And so with with where the story's airing tonight, so I'm curious with where we are right now, what is your message, or what are you kind of telling people who are concerned about this, who are those 65 plus? Can they say that I can go back to work, or do they need
yes.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm telling everybody about this whole crisis that we're in. And of course, we're in a crisis on a number of levels, right? So the whole point that I think people need to keep in mind is sometimes the employer doesn't have the information they need. So I think employees should push back. So if somebody's 65 plus and they want to go back to work, they should say to their employer, hey, look, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I appreciate you looking out for me, but I really want to go back to work. Most employers, hopefully, are going to get that message. Now, the flip side is, if you have an employee who tells you, hey, I'm afraid, I'm sick, I'm immunocompromised, you've got to listen to that as well if you're an employer. So one of the things I heard some recently that I just think is so great is we all have a little grace, right? We all have to be willing to take a bit of a deep breath and think about, okay, what should I do now? It doesn't make sense to exclude people who want to work. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense if somebody is ill or could get ill to bring them into the workplace. That doesn't make any sense either. So I'm trying to help our clients and the folks who we're dealing with just to take a step back and think about, okay, what kind of workplace am I operating? What are the job duties of this employee? Do I think it can be done safely? Is there anything else I can do to make the workplace safer? So it's really taking more of a holistic approach rather than just a check the box. You're 65 plus, you're not coming back. You have diabetes, you're not coming back. We can't do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of, you totally touched on my next question and kind of the other side of it, because I've been talking, we did a whole separate story on folks with compromised immune systems. And it's the other side where those people, are I'm scared to come back to work. This is,
Yes.
putting me at risk, do they have a right to say, I don't want to go back to work, especially, if they maybe fall under these more essential things where like they might have to be more in the office?
Well, that's a great question. And the truth is, just saying I'm afraid to go back to work is not enough.
Okay.
You have to be advised by a doctor to self-isolate, or being tested for COVID, or have a condition where the doctor says, look, it is unsafe for you to be at work. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us have anxiety about what's now, right? That's not going to be enough to justify someone not coming back to work. Now, all that means is they can say, not coming back. The employer can replace them. They can apply for unemployment. Sometimes they'll get unemployment, sometimes they won't. Mm-hmm. But the employer can't make the person come back to work, right? But they don't have a legal entitlement to remain off work right now unless they are sick or they're caring for someone who is ill related to COVID. Now, remember, there were a lot of leave laws on the books in California before COVID happened. So there are people who are pregnant who have a right to stay home. There are people who are taking care of a child who's ill. They have a right to stay home, or taking care of a parent. So these new leave laws that we have sort of had to get used to as part of COVID-19, those layer on the other leaves that everybody already had an entitlement to. So the employer really has to have a brush when they're looking at, all right, does this person have an entitlement to not come back to work?
That's really interesting. I love the leave law kind of side of it and how that's almost shined a light more on it. And that's actually, we had a viewer question and she was saying, I'm not immunocompromised, but my son is. And I'm scared she works in a school, so like lots of, bacteria and stuff going around talking to a lot of different people. She's worried that she's going to go back to work and get it and then give it to her son who's at risk. But she isn't. So does she have a right, and does that fall under the leave law there of maybe taking care of her son, or how does that work if, you're worried about passing it on?
So that's a great question. So the healthcare provider, her son's healthcare provider might tell her, listen, I want you to self-isolate because I want you to be home taking care of him. And in that case, she would have a right to take the time off related to COVID. Now, there are a lot of leave laws related to COVID that apply of 500 or fewer employees. Other laws apply if you have more than 500 employees. But we've all heard of the Families First law, and that's the law that looks at whether someone has a right to what we call COVID-19 sick leave, or the temporary child care FMLA. If someone's child care center is closed, the child can't go back to school, they can't go to summer camp, something. So in your example with the viewer, that person would be able to say, okay, look, either I'm entitled to time off for COVID-19 sick leave if my son's health provider is going to tell me to self-isolate, or if they works for a large enough employer, you may also be entitled to time off under the Family and Medical Leave Act and the California Family Rights Act, because you have up to 12 weeks of time every year to care for a covered family member, which would of course include a child.
That's really interesting. And then we had another question, a viewer who's had a compromised immune system, and they're asking specifically, and I'm not sure if this is relevant because I haven't dug into it myself, but they asked if they're protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act from.
That's such a great question. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law. There's a California law called the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And what it says, what they both say, is that employers have to reasonably accommodate a person with a disability. Okay? So the viewer's question is, look, might I be protected under the ADA or the Fair Employment and Housing Act? Here's the way it works. First question is, do you have a disability? Second question is the accommodation you're asking for reasonable? So when you mentioned earlier about essential worker, it's going to be less reasonable to let an essential worker stay home than it would be for a worker who worked in a workplace where they're not essential, right? So there's always this balancing that happens when you do this idea of, should I reasonably accommodate somebody? So that person very well may be entitled, but there has to be an analysis done based on healthcare provider information and then the essential functions of the job and whether it's reasonable. For example, maybe the person just wants to telework. Well, if the job is going to be able to be done by teleworking, great idea, perfect. If it can't be, it may not be. accommodation.
Okay, that's really interesting. And then, I know you said, with the message, I mean, what I took away from your message was kind of like it's really a base, kind of case by case kind of situation with this. Do you just kind of have a message to people on like, I feel like I'm trying to focus on those elderly who want to go as well as the compromised immune systems. Do you kind of just have like an overall message for, either of those groups who are asking us a lot of these questions?
Absolutely. So for the folks who are immunocompromised, I think they really need to take a step back and ask what is best for them. We don't want anybody in the workplace compromising themselves or anyone else. I know money is a big deal for many of us right now, and the unemployment is slow to come sometimes, and I realize it's not always possible, and some of us feel the pressure that we have to work. But I really want people to think about what is best for their health. I also want employers to think about what for their employees. Everybody is struggling right now. Everyone is trying so hard to support our community, make sure that we're doing everything we can be doing, and we do have a little grace. We really need to maybe go a little farther than maybe in the past to try to help and accommodate and make